The title of my series this year is The Art of the Prayer Book. It's based on a book by Dr. John N. Wall, professor of 16th and 17th century English literature at the North Carolina State University. The title of his book is Transformations of the Word. Reinhold Niebuhr, in his book Christ and Culture, has shown the close connection between religion and culture. Anglican worship cannot be understood or appreciated apart from the English culture in which it came to be and in which it thrived, as well as the broader European culture of the Renaissance. Hence, the title of this first talk is Poetry and Reformation in Renaissance England. The ecumenical movement gave us the saying, in essentials, unity, in non-essentials, diversity, in all things, charity. Anglicans should be particularly interested in that second part, in non-essentials diversity, because as Anglicans, willing or not, we are diverse, we are different. And as a pope once said about the Jesuits, let them be what they are, or let them cease to be. The difference of Anglicans is that we occupy a third place between Rome and Geneva, and that is expressed in a poem by George Herbert, who we'll be considering in a later talk on the British Church. I joy, dear mother, when I view thy perfect lineaments and hue both sweet and bright. Beauty in thee takes up her place and dates her letters from thy face when she doth write. A fine aspect in fit array, neither too mean nor yet too gay, shows what is best. Outlandish looks may not compare, for all they either painted are, or else undressed. She on the hills which wantonly allureth all, in hope to be by her preferred, hath kissed so long her painted shrines, that e'en her face by kissing shines for her reward. She in the valley is so shy of dressing, that her hair doth lie about her ears. While she avoids her neighbor's pride, she wholly goes on the other side, and nothing wears. But dearest mother, what those miss, the mean, thy praise and glory is, and long may be. Blessed be God, whose love it was to double mote thee with his grace, and none but thee. The difference of Anglicans results from our history and specifically from our Reformation. The Church of England is a Protestant church, but the Reformation which brought it into existence was different from the Protestant Reformations on the continent. Luther's challenge to the papacy came from his discovery of Paul's teaching of salvation by faith apart from the works of the law. This teaching flew in the face of the practice of selling indulgences to build St. Peter's in Rome. In England, in 1534, Henry VIII declared himself to be the head of the church, and this act of supremacy turned the Church in England into the Church of England. But this was only the prelude to the Reformation proper, which, according to Hall, began on a June day in 1544. This was the day when, in accordance with the wishes of Henry VIII, a general procession in all cities, towns, churches, and parishes of this realm would recite in English the litany. This procession, enabled by a new English text, would lead the people through a transformation of all that had become familiar and comfortable about their religion. It would change the basis for their understandings of the relationship between God and his people and between church and lay folk. So according to Wall, the English Reformation was a liturgical Reformation, and the point of this Reformation was the use of language. The post-Reformation Church of England defies all efforts to define it confessionally. And this has led to criticism. In 1989, Clifford Longley wrote a piece for the Times of London, which had the caption, "A tolerant church worthy of a generous obituary." Longley, as a Roman Catholic, considers Anglicanism to be a home for religious-minded skepticism, and he faults the weakness of the intellectual content of the Anglican way. Confessional churches are so accustomed to understand Christianity as a doctrinal and ethical system that they assume that it cannot be embraced on any other terms. But such an understanding of Christianity is the result of the first and most serious schism in the history of the Christian movement, the schism between orthodoxy and gnosis. Gnosis, as the inner way to God, had an ambivalent attitude to ecclesiastical pronouncements on faith and morals, whereas emerging orthodoxy defined faith as obedience to the preached word of God. But if Anglicanism lacks a clear confessional identity, it has something which, for me at least, is far more precious. It has something called Anglican ethos. I can't define Anglican ethos, but I know it when I see it or hear it. And I heard it most recently in the Queen's remarks to the Commonwealth apropos of the coronavirus. The authors of the BAS made a deliberate decision to forsake the prayer book tradition and to seek guidance in what they considered the golden age of the church, the period before the Council of Nicaea in 325. In this, they relied on the work of the Anglican Benedictine Dom Gregory Dix. Alan Hayes of Wycliffe College has delivered a severe criticism of this work of Dick's. He quotes the Anglican pastoral theologian Urban Holmes, who observed Dick's wrote movingly, sometimes with no relation to the facts, occasionally drawing from sources which, as far as other scholars could tell, did not exist. Can Dick's contentions about the primitive pre-Nicene tradition of church and Eucharist be confirmed by modern scholarship? The general answer is probably not. The BAS says that the second Eucharistic prayer is based upon the apostolic tradition of Hippolytus. Scholars of Dick's generation seldom asked fundamental historiographical questions about the origins and purposes of their texts. Reading documents like the apostolic tradition of Hippolytus, for example, they have simply plundered what they wanted to fit the picture of the early church that they were attempting to paint, without asking themselves why it ever came to be there in the first place, and what this might have to say about its value as historical evidence. From the historian's point of view, there is no more a single 3rd century Christian liturgical tradition than there is a single 20th century Christian liturgical tradition. Apart from Dick's credibility as a historian, the difference between his book and that of John Wall is evident in the 2 titles. For Dick's, words are not important where liturgy is concerned. It is the shape of the liturgy that counts. For Wall, the words are essential because the whole point of the English Reformation was a shift in the use of language. In the Renaissance, there was a shift in the understanding of language and its use. And this can be illustrated in the great Dutch humanist Erasmus of Rotterdam. Wall says Erasmus provided the English reformers with models for the use of language to participate in God's new acts in English history. In his colloquy, The Godly Feast, religious discourse leads not to verbal formulations of abstract doctrine, but to charity. Erasmus's conversants take turns interpreting biblical texts. Their progress leads them to an altar where Christ presides. Erasmus in no way denigrates the activity of speech, but he shifts it. He shifts attention from the conclusions of discourse toward process itself as a way of drawing the reader into a larger, ongoing conversation and teaching him how to participate in it. One function of religious language is persuasion. Persuasion. And persuasion was particularly important in the English church in the 16th century, where there were those who did not at all agree with the direction in which the prayer book was leading the nation. Religious language can persuade in various ways. For the Puritans, the preferred vehicle for persuasion is the sermon. But the sermon does not captivate everybody. Queen Elizabeth, on one occasion, called out from the royal box to the gentleman in the pulpit, saying, "Come down, sir, you preached long enough." But what the sermon does not accomplish, the verse may do. George Herbert wrote, "A verse may find him who the sermon flies." You may not like the sermon, but you can be touched by a verse. And this brings in the whole question of poetry, which is what this book is all about. Ever since Plato banished the poets from his republic, there has been a war on poetry. And one campaign in this war, a fateful campaign, as I've suggested, was the persecution of Gnosis. Wall cites Sir Philip Sidney in his defense of poetry. Sidney points out that the Psalms are songs, and they're part of our worship. And therefore, as he says, they liberate new representations elaborated by the subject of these enunciations. And therefore, as he says, properly understood, poetry does not deserve to be scourged from the house of God. He defines the end and working of poetry as to convince us that it deserveth not to be scourged out of the house of God, because poetry does not seek to represent some pre-existing truth, but rather it seeks to move us into another world. They seek to impinge on the world of the readers, making use of the residual powers of language artfully employed to provoke response, to judge the world as it is in terms of what it is not or is not yet, and to invite the reader's participation in a process by taking that goodness in hand can move the world closer to what it yet may be. So to conclude, at the heart of the Church of England is not intellectual assent to a specific doctrinal position, but the entering into something done. Thomas Cranmer, when he defined his beliefs about the Church, made this point explicit. But if thou wilt needs know where the true Church of Christ is and where the false, take this for a plain and full answer. Wherever the word of God is truly preached and the sacraments duly administered, there is the true Church, the very spouse of God, Christ being the head thereof. What Wall is seeking to provide in this book is a report on the relationship between the Church of England and three major writers who supported, encouraged, and promoted involvement in the goals and methods of the reformers who created the Church of England through the documents that enabled its corporate worship. Those three writers are Spencer, Herbert, and Vaughan, and those are the three topics for the remaining three presentations in this course. Thank you very much for your attention.